Hi everyone, I see some familiar faces, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Irina. I'm a UX and UI designer at Infinum. As we're all aware, today we live in a world of intense information overload. So we're constantly bombarded through screens of all shapes and sizes, and it's harder now more than ever to get your message across. Today I'm going to give you 5 quick and dirty tips, or rather tell you about 5 key principles of information design and tell you how you can apply them in your daily UX UI design work. So first of all, I will talk a bit about what information design is, why it's important. I'll show some examples of good as well as bad information design. I will tell you about some of the key principles of good design and show you do's and don'ts of how to apply them. A bit about me first. I started my career in graphic design, as I think the majority of UX UI designers do. I was working at a printer's. A bootcamp in Stamparia is, I think, what every designer needs at the start of their career. After a while, I decided to specialize, and I pursued an MA degree in information design at the University of Reading. That was around 5 years ago, and ever since I switched my focus to UX and UI. For the last 2 years, I've worked at Infinum. I focus mainly on business applications for international startups and things like that. Unfortunately, that's all under NDA, so I cannot show you any of it, but trust me, if you're looking for a challenge when you have vast amounts of data and information that you want to present in a single screen, that's the kind of projects that I'm working on. As you can probably tell, I need another icebreaker. So before we move on to the, let's say, official presentation, I want to tell you a little anecdote. During my time at my master's studies course at the University of Reading, pictured here is my professor, Mr. Michael Twyman, and every week he would hold these archives and collection session where he would bring in examples from his personal collection of various design artifacts from both graphic and information design. And one particular session, he showed us examples of form design, which is what Milos will tell you more about during his talk. And one particular example he showed us, I wasn't able to find the exact example, but let's say it looked something like this. And there was a question with quite a bit of space, such as here. And the person filling out the form, a woman, similar to how this person filled out this form, they added their response, and the remainder of the field that's empty, they sort of crossed it off with a zigzag line. And Professor Twyman asked us why we think that is. And out of around 30 people from all across the world, I was the only person with my hand up. And I'm curious to see if anyone else has an idea. Why would someone who's filling out a form and they've written something down and then they cross out the rest of the...
So no one else can fit something.
Exactly. That's what I said. And Professor Michael told me, he laughed, and he said, well, no wonder someone from the Balkans has that kind of mindset and is afraid that someone will come after them and jeopardize their integrity. So maybe this doesn't have much to do with the key principles of information design that we're going through today, but I needed this. And I also wanted to show you how sometimes design is more than pretty pictures. Okay, so I've thrown the term around quite a lot, but I'm wondering if we are all on the same page about what exactly is information design. So I'm curious to hear if someone has a definition, if someone can tell me what they think information design is. Well, I actually predicted there will be a couple of answers like this, because usually when people think of information design, I was under the impression that they tend to think about data visualization, infographics, examples such as this one. And while that is true, that is part of information design, actually information design is more than that. So it's a multidisciplinary, that's a big word, field that focuses on structuring and presenting any type of complex information in a way that makes it easy for users to understand, makes it easy for them to learn, remember, and retain that information. So actually, you're encountering examples of information design in your daily life all the time. So besides, let's say, pretty magazine spreads such as this one, you're seeing examples of information design when you're traveling. So whether it's looking at a subway map, or whether it's finding your way around an airport and looking at wayfinding signage. Also educational materials, instruction materials, and again, form design, and even information architecture and UX. All of those things can be considered information design. But why is it important? What can bad information design lead to? It all comes down to bad user experience. So here we have two different examples of instruction manuals. I think probably a lot of you recognize what's on the left here. I'm guessing that there's a significant percentage of you that sometimes purchased and assembled a piece of IKEA furniture. And it goes to show that their instruction manuals are really pinnacles and probably one of the best examples of information design, because they transcend language, cultural, or any other barriers. They don't use actual language. They use simple pictures that are simplified, but not too much. And I think that other than the price point, probably the easy assembly is one of the biggest reasons for why IKEA is so popular. But on the right here, we have an example of a page from a DSLR camera instruction manual. So other than a resident photographer here, I think we have some other photographers around. But from what I've heard from people I know, when you buy a camera and you get this instruction manual, the first thing you do is throw it in the bin and you hop onto YouTube to look for a simple explanation of how you're supposed to use your new camera, because apparently they're very information heavy. They use a lot of jargon. They use a lot of, or they display a lot of information that's really not that crucial for you. Okay, another example. Imagine you really, really, really have to use the restroom. I think if we're looking at the example on the left, I think you would be pretty confident about where you're supposed to walk in to go about doing your business. But what about the one on the right? And does anyone recognize it?
Bobby.
Yes. So Bobby is the restaurant just across the street. And we often go there, Infinum team, during our lunch breaks. And I remember the first time I went there, it took me a while. It took me a while because, I mean, if you really look at it, these two totem-like sculptures, one of them is wearing a dress and a hint of a red lipstick. But I don't think it really worked. Two reasons. Number one, they added these paintings of a woman and a man because obviously people were peeing in the wrong restroom all the time. And I know it for a fact because a lot of my male colleagues told me that they were actually using the ladies' restroom. Okay. All of that's very fun, I'm sure, but what does that have to do with UX and UI? Actually, all good examples of information design have something in common. And I'm going to tell you a bit about what those 5 key, let's say, principles are and how they can be applied to not really even elevate, but just to help you whenever you have a bunch of information that you need to fit into one small mobile phone screen. So those 5 are structure, clarity, simplicity, emphasis, and unity. When it comes to structure, it means that content that you're implementing and designing around needs to be structured so that it's easy for users to read it, to understand it, to learn it, and to remember what they've learned. So it's always important to, as we stated in the beginning, there's a lot of information and people don't have a lot of time, so it's always good to optimize the content that you're showing them in a way that makes it as easy as possible for them to consume it. The next example is clarity. Clarity has a lot to do with legibility, which is a very important accessibility point, and that's something that Emmanuel will tell you more about during his lecture. But essentially, it's all about users being able to easily distinguish between different visual elements such as text, images, etc. Simplicity, it revolves around readability, so not about how you read and how you discern the different elements on the page, but rather how well you understand them. Because your users are people, you should speak to them in a simple language and avoid being like Joey and using thesaurus on every word. So you don't need to always use big words. You're talking to regular people, use regular language. Emphasis, this one's probably the least, let's say, strict. You can use various different methods in order to attract, direct, and keep users' attention. And finally, unity. This one revolves all around using established patterns, being consistent with the design elements and visual language that you use. As Jakob Nielsen would say, you're something around that, like that I will reiterate, but something like always remember that your users are primarily using other apps. So don't try to reinvent the wheel every time you do something. Okay, now we got the theory out of the way. I'm going to show you through a couple of examples of do's and don'ts, how that actually works and what does that actually mean when designing an interface. So if we begin with a structure, this would be a bad example. So why, if we go back to the definition of it, what's important is that when you display, let's say, a bigger amount of information, it's always good for your user to be able to, at a glance, so when they quickly look at a screen, they should be able to get the key information out of it, which isn't the case in this example. There's not a lot of hierarchy, everything's more or less on the same level, so there's really not a lot of that that's jumping out or attracting the user particularly. Okay. What you might want to do instead is think about hierarchy, so clearly differentiating between different levels of headings, dividing your content into sections, maybe highlighting some important information with colorful bullets, and again, maybe highlighting the most important calls to action on your screen with, let's say, a button. The next principle is clarity. Here's an example of a don't. Would someone like to take this and tell me why this probably isn't as good?
If I got something like this, then I would tell the person who sent it to me for revision, it's not so bad. Once we change everything, it will be better. So I think I can't see very well, which I think is the point. The button isn't aligned at all. The text, the image obscures much of the text. The fonts are, I don't know, I can't see from here. Maybe so, but I would change everything. Maybe, I don't know. There are a lot of ways in which I would change it. If we're going to keep the photo like this, then some opacity has to happen. The button, it has to go entirely, so I don't know. There are a lot of versions, but I think mostly it's not legible. You can't read anything.
There is something that you'll keep.
I'm guessing not.
Photo, maybe.
Maybe photo.
I don't know. If we change the, how do I say, orientation, then maybe something could be salvaged. If we do some partial opacity or gradient, something like that.
I was looking for this answer, actually. The main issue with this is legibility, but that's also something that the manual will tell you more about. But a lot of designers, especially those that are more UI inclined, tend to go for pretty images or colors and place important information on top of it, which then in turn makes it that there's not enough contrast. And essentially this, although the photo is very pretty, and I'm guessing the title as well, no one can read it, so it's not usable. Instead, what you want to do is always ensure that there's enough contrast between basically your main elements, so your text, and the background that they're on. Next, we have simplicity. So remember, simplicity is all about language, and I've used this exaggerated conundrum here to illustrate it, but I think that whenever you have cancellation options or dialogues regarding cancellation, it tends to get a bit, something like this, but it's very extreme. But when you're confirming cancellation and canceling cancellation, and there's a lot of cancels there, and there's a lot of sentences there. I mean, if you read the description, maybe you know what you're supposed to do about it, but again, why do you want to give your users a heart attack? Instead of that, make it as easy as possible for them to cancel that payment. Use as little text as possible and try and be as intuitive as possible with your labels. The next one is emphasis. So this is sort of a mock-up of an app that lists out smart devices in your home, and the user here is supposed to be able to see that there's something that needs his attention on this screen. And I'm guessing, or will someone tell me, does something strike you as getting your attention? Is something here emphasized or not? Probably not. As I mentioned earlier, emphasis is one principle that I don't feel like it can be as, let's say, well defined. You can use different methods to achieve this, but for example, if there's something that needs your attention on a screen, you can use different methods such as maybe separation or utilizing higher contrast, different colors and things like that. So that way you're diverting your user's attention much better. And finally, we have unity. Unity is a personal pet peeve of mine because I really like to be consistent, and a lot of times designers aren't consistent. They tend to think of one screen at a time or one instance at a time and try and make it look as good as possible. And again, I think that what's much more important is to be consistent in what you're showing and to establish patterns that reduce the learning curve of your users so that whenever they're on a new screen, they know exactly which kind of button does what or what color symbolizes what. This example here is an example from an app that I actually had to redesign. Not the actual example, I recreated it, but I didn't exaggerate it. It was pretty much like this. So they use the primary color for multitudes of uses, for displaying the main actions, for displaying the active and inactive states of elements, and as well as for highlighting the My Profile label, which doesn't do anything, it's just there. And they made it look like a link. What's better to do instead is to make sure that the visual language of your app is always consistent. So if you have a primary color and you use it for actionable elements, you always do that. For example, here, blue is for buttons. You have a gray for inactive components, and you have black for selected or active components. That was it when it comes to these quick and dirty tips. Just to reiterate, information design is the organization, structuring, and presentation of complex information in a way that is understandable, accessible, and appealing to the intended audience. So, hold on. Next time you have, like I said, a bunch of information that you need to fit into one screen, consider providing structure. Yeah, this isn't working. Clarity, simplicity, emphasis, and unity of information and design elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina, for this beautiful, smooth transition to English, which I didn't do, which was what I was supposed to do. Thank you very much. And kudos for the passionate colleague. So usually speakers do have like this do's and don'ts, and people are not that passionate about saying, this should be kind of burned.
I love
cool.
that.
Yeah, it was, if this was sent to me for revision, I would fire that person.
I would burn it.
I would, burn their laptop, and I would find an instance on the cloud in Figma where this is stored, and also kind of burn it to the ground. So I like the passion in there. Do you have any questions for Irina? And you can ask. You do not need to ask in English. I'll just repeat the question in English for the people who will be seeing the video. So don't be shy.
You can at least ask me where I bought my shirt.
Okay, then I'll start, Irina. So you've given us 5 principles. Is there one that you would say is the most important? Is there one that maybe sort of entails the other 4, or something that's usually either a easy win, kind of quick win, or something that you actually want to achieve? So you can maybe steer away from some of those, but at least this one needs to be properly done.
Well, yes, I kind of structured them like that. I think structure is probably the most important, structure, because I think the key thing is to think about what information you have and what information you need to present, and then think about how to create a sensible hierarchy out of that and to sort of create that entire composition. And then everything else is regarding the specific elements. So I think structure is the way to go. That's sort of your first step anyway. So I would say that.
Cool. Any questions now? Somebody's stretching over there. I've seen you. Do you want to ask a question or? Yeah, okay, sure. This was a wild shot, but yeah, let's see. Oh, you have a question prepared on your phone?
No, I don't have.
Okay.
So it's not actually a question, more like I want to hear your comment. It was about one of the first 2 principles when you were speaking about confusing design and confusing alignment of informations. What do you think about airplane companies and companies who sell airplane tickets, because that's their regular design? They always make it so confusing. I want to hear your comment about it.
And
Well, should I wait for the mic?
I'm gonna do a run.
Okay. Well, as I was saying, these principles apply to, because they're information design principles, so I think they apply to any kind of design. So whenever you're supposed to display information that people are supposed to use, it would be good to keep these in mind. So even if it's something like a paper ticket or any kind of a medium or any kind of an artifact, if it's not legible, if there's poor hierarchy, people cannot read it properly, then yeah, I for sure agree that these should be kept in mind even in those situations.
When you want to cancel your ticket or something similar, they intentionally make it so confusing that then you say, okay, I'm not going to.
Yeah, because they want your money.
Cool. Anybody else stretching and wanting to ask a question? Okay, then we have like a proper raised hand in the first row.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. It was very lovely and very interesting. So aside from Bobby restroom labels, if you could redesign anything in the physical space, what would you start with and what would you do?
That's interesting. Well, you caught me there. I need to think about that. I can't remember what was a big pet peeve of mine last time. Well, maybe I'll say a lot of our banking applications probably need to be redesigned, but I think someone else will tell you a bit more about that today. You have a question?
Yes, I have a question. This is more about this truth and. So I have a really difficult question for you, Irina, and tell us now. Please tell us: are you a dog or a cat person?
That's like Sophie's choice for me. For a while, I was only a cat person. I thought that dogs were too clingy and boring. But now I cannot design. I have both, so it's a difficult one. I don't want to answer that one.
Okay. I was listening. I've seen.
Were you? What was I saying?
I'm gonna give you the same answer that you've given to the colleague here, by not saying anything. Anybody else has a question? Okay, Milos is also preparing for his lecture, so.
So one of the things that I'm kind of very passionate about in the design work is the emphasis part, actually, because I think the designers struggle the most with this one. The other ones are somewhat, I would say, easier to learn. The emphasis one is very, very difficult, and we always end up in designers leaning on to 50 Shades of Grey in UI elements. So in the work of where you work now, in a bigger team, how is the emphasis actually addressed on a larger scale before getting into the UI, so that you don't come into these points as you were showing before, that something is not emphasized?
Thank you for your question. So emphasis and unity are kind of two sides of the same coin, I think. People... Sometimes designers, like you said, they want to emphasize something and then they steer away from the consistency from the design system for things that are established. I think emphasis in and of itself is a topic that maybe deserves its own presentation. That's why I said that that one's kind of difficult to define in this format. How we handle it is there's usually a person that's responsible for the design system at large. So if you want something new, something that looks different, if you can really elaborate on why you need that thing to look different, it sort of needs to go through a chain of command. You need to ask for that person to create that for you and things like that. But it's not perfect. There's a lot of human error there as well. But that's what I would say. There needs to be someone who's responsible for keeping things neat and organized.
Okay. Somebody else? Yeah.
Thank you for the great presentation. With all this designing for the users of other apps and all these design languages on one hand, and having to be done before the sprint ends on the other hand, do you think that designers are getting afraid to innovate and to show authorship and just people becoming slaves to these design languages, material design? And how do you combat that?
I think that does happen. I think it's a matter of balancing it somehow. I think you need to go back to why you're designing this and what you're designing it for, and then you go from there and try and decide what's okay to be sacrificed. If it's something that's meant for general public, maybe a fancy landing page or something like that, then maybe you're okay to sacrifice some of these things for, maybe reinventing the wheel, thinking of something completely new. But if it's a business application that's supposed to be used by, a lot of people or something like that, where the main focus is usability, then maybe you don't reinvent the wheel. So I think it's kind of a fine balance there.
Okay. Anybody else? Cool.
That was more than I expected.
Yeah, it was. Cool. Thank you, Irina. Now we'll move on to the next speaker.